Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time for us to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe today. Now, we'll begin here in Nigeria, where Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has appointed Mohammed Nami to replace Babatunde Fowler as chairman of the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Now, Fowler, whose tenure ended yesterday on Monday, was confirmed for a 4-year tenure by the Senate on December 9th, 2015. Now, he's expected to hand over to the most senior director on the board until the Senate confirms Nami as FIRS chairman and the new board as well. Meanwhile, Babatunde Fowler had presented himself for reappointment for a second term, but was obviously turned down by President Muhammadu Buhari. So Babatunde Fowler had sent over this letter with regards to putting himself forward for reappointments, but Buhari has come forward with his appointment that has to be then confirmed by the Senate. Doctor?
Well, you'll recall that, whereas it is very clear that Babatunde Fowler's tenure as chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service recorded a lot of achievements. He himself, responding to the query that was served on him about 2 months ago by the presidency, tried to detail his achievements, how he had been able to increase, revenue collection, expand the tax base, digitalize operations in the FIRS, introduce innovation. But at the same time, his tenure was quite controversial. Yeah. Because there were persons within the Federal Inland Revenue Service who petitioned the presidency about what they called his mode of operation and his style. And, the response from those who supported Babatunde Fowler was that these were people suffering from the guardian syndrome. The guardian syndrome simply means resistance to change and innovation. People who insisted that, look, this was their territory, and they would rather do things the way they've been doing them. So he had internal issues. He also had issues of a political nature in terms of his mode of his appointment, in terms of his extraction into that office. Don't forget that, he used to be the chairman of the Lagos State Inland Revenue Service. And so there was some politics around it about whether it was brought by, Senator Ahmed Tinubu, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, or whether it was, brought by the vice president, whose classmate he was in secondary school. So there was that resistance in-house. There was also a political dimension to it. But I think in terms of performance, that is what is important. He was able to acquit himself honorably, at least in the eyes of the public. Now, the president has exercised his prerogative to choose whoever he wants. As I said yesterday, when Odia brought up the subject, I pointed out that, look, it's entirely up to the president. He has the constitutional powers to appoint those he thinks, would best serve, the goals of the administration and help him achieve his objectives of moving Nigeria to the next level. So the president, in his wisdom, has decided to choose someone else, Mohammed Nami. And if you look at Mohammed Nami's profile, it's not as if he himself is a novice in the business. He has been involved in tax advisory services. He has served as a tax consultant. He was involved in 2017 in the committee set up for the recovery of public debts. So Mohammed Nami, in his own capacity, has a profile that looks like it befits the office. But on him, of course, he will be assessed on the basis of his performance when he assumes office. In the meantime, the most senior director in the FIRS will take over until Mohammed Nami's appointment is confirmed by the Senate as constitutionally required. Some Nigerians may then talk about ethnicity. They may say, look, every vacant position, why is it somebody from the north that occupies
Mohammed Nami is from Kaduna State, right, Doctor?
Yes, Kaduna State, yes, and that's from the north. But I don't think that's a subject that we should further, try to dredge up. But there will be some Nigerians who will be concerned, to say that, look, there must be some other persons in other parts of the country, and that the alleged ethnicization, northernization, of the administration is something that may look untidy. But I don't think we should dwell on that.
I don't think so.
We should just expect that, one, the president has exercised his prerogative. He cannot be questioned on that. And second, that Mohammed Nami, when he assumes office, will do well. And that the contributions that Babatunde Fowler was able to make during the period that he was in that saddle will be duly recognized, acknowledged, and commended.
Absolutely. And Doctor, I just wanted to add, I believe even when Babatunde Fowler came on the show with us a couple months ago to discuss several issues, you had actually also asked him about this particular faction within the FIRS that's formed a group against him, and he claimed that he had no knowledge about it, if I'm correct. Yes,
what he said was that these were faceless persons, making false allegations, and that as far as he was concerned, the FIRS under his watch was doing quite well. But it could also have been a diplomatic
Very
answer.
true.
But all of that is in the past now.
It is.
We wish him well as he moves on to the next assignment before him, or whatever he chooses to do.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next story. Now, in a fresh initiative to enthrone greater transparency in government business, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has directed the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation to publish daily financial statements of federal government transactions. Now, Buhari's directive on the publication of daily financial transactions of the government was given in Abuja at the launch of a new financial transparency policy, an open treasury portal designed to give the citizenry access to information on fiduciary matters, improve accountability and transparency in public financial management. Now, the policy portal compels daily statements from the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, giving summaries of flows in and out of the Treasury with a breakdown of agencies responsible. So, Doctor, the first take for anyone would be, okay, this is the kind of transparency that we're looking for. We have asked for this for a very long time, and it seems that this is now coming to fruition through policy. What is your take on this? Is there something else that could be added to this as well that may question the particular nature of what we're seeing here?
Well, basically, I think it's a welcome development. Whatever steps the federal government of Nigeria takes to ensure transparency and accountability in financial transactions is welcome.
Absolutely.
And I guess that this is part of the move of the administration to check leakages, wastages, and corruption within the system, and to also promote the spirit of the Freedom of Information law. In other words, if this is published on a daily basis as directed, then of course, individuals, stakeholders will have direct information about financial transactions. And it is interesting to note that the federal government has opened a portal online, www.opentreasury.gov.ng, where these publications will be made by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. And the gentleman who represented President Buhari at the occasion further pointed out that this is an initiative of the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. My only worry is that, can this be done on a daily basis?
That's what I was going to ask you.
Do we have the level of digitalization that can make this possible? When I read the story, my reaction was, okay, why don't they do this on a weekly basis to give enough time, for the transactions to be fully collated? The Office of the Accountant General is expected to release information on transactions up to 10 million, right? The MDAs are expected to publish transactions above 5 million and to indicate who is taking the money, the purpose for which the money is being disbursed, and, what particular activity, the money is also meant for. So in principle, it's a very good idea. And MDAs are also supposed to submit weekly reports of transactions, monthly reports of transactions not later than 7 days after the end of the month, and also quarterly reports. So it's in principle a good idea if they can make it work. But beyond that also, I see that there should be a responsibility for the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation. Usually many of these accounts, transactions are not audited. And you then find that, look, apart from publishing the transactions, I think there should be the oversight from the Office of the Auditor General. And the presidency should consider giving specific directives to the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation to complement the efforts of the Office of the Accountant General. Absolutely. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, where the president was also represented, the president made a point about how corruption and conflicts, pose a threat to the development process in Africa. And I think that's a good point to make.
Absolutely. That is a very good point to make, because those are the two greatest issues that one would say we are facing right now. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're taking some more stories on the news headlines of today. And back here in Nigeria, a mass action is being threatened against the Nigerian government if activist and journalist Omoyele Sowore is not released within 14 days. Now, more than 200 civil society organizations are demanding his release, and others, as they say, that they've been illegally detained by the state security services. Now, an earlier version of this report used information from Sowore's outlet, Sahara Reporters, that the coalition would shut down the country, and they are actually threatening to occupy human rights commissions across Nigeria. Now, Arise News correspondent Nissi Gabriel reports. Let's take a look.
The rearrest of Omoyele Sowore has caused outrage, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. Sowore had spent 3 months in the custody of the State Security Service before being released on the 5th of December. But less than 24 hours later, after a dramatic scuffle in court, he was detained once more. The actions of the security officers has been condemned by 2 U.S. senators and the American State Department. The chorus of voices angry over Sowore's rearrest is growing. Now a cross-section of Nigerian society is giving a 14-day ultimatum to the government. Release him or face civil disobedience.
We demand the following. Number 1, President Muhammadu Buhari to show accountability as President and Commander-in-Chief and address the nation on his commitment to the rule of law and human rights. Number 2, the release of all illegally detained persons by the Department of Secret Service as revealed by Amnesty, Premium Times and Punch newspapers in recent months. Number 3, that the government obey all pending court orders. Number 4, an investigation of the officers who violated protocol and the circumstances leading to Omoyele Sowore's second arrest. And lastly, the unconditional release of Omoyele Sowore per his bail terms. If these 5 demands are not honored within 14 days, we call on patriots across Nigeria to join us as we occupy the National Human Rights Commission, offices across the country, as it is legally mandated to protect rights, and it also reports to the presidency.
These groups say what's happening reminds them of the days of military rule.
We also have moral obligation to ensure that we sanitize governance in this country. You cannot, because you are in power, abuse the power. We must checkmate excesses of public officials. And those security people that have done this act of shameless act, we demand that they must also be investigated and fired, because they have put the country to shame. All over the world, people watch it, security, DSS personnel coming to the premises of court to actually even point and engage in a very competent way. So we think that this is a collective responsibility, and we are not thinking that it should be limited to civil society organization. It should be for all Nigerians to be concerned about the kind of shame and the kind of brutality that we are going through in this country.
The government has defended its actions, with the security service denying its rearrested Sowore inside a courtroom. They accuse his supporters of staging the scuffle. Whatever the circumstances of his rearrest, it's clear if Sowore is not released soon, his supporters are willing to take action. Nissi Gabriel, Arise News.
Now, I don't know how on earth those are actions that can be defended, but there we had Yemi Adamolekum leading that conversation on the 14-day ultimatum that civil society groups are now bringing forward to the government with regards to not only the illegal detainment of Omoyele Sowore, but others as well. They mentioned Zakzaki, they mentioned Colonel Dasuki, and other journalists beyond Sowore that are also being held illegally. What is your take, Doctor?
Well, I mean, the intervention by these civil society organizations reminds me of a play written by a Tanzanian, Ibrahim Hussein, titled Kinjekitile. Now, in Kinjekitile, the thrust of the play is that when a word is spoken, it could grow. It may be spoken by a diviner, it may be spoken by an individual, but it could gather momentum because there's something spiritual, even symbolic about words. And this, I think, is what has happened in this case. In the case of the situation in Kinjekitile, this was during the Maji-Maji War against German occupation of Tanganyika, as Tanzania was then known. And, that play illustrates how a revolution could come about just because somebody has spoken a word. And although many people are skeptical about Sowore's revolutionary mission, but I think that unwittingly the Nigerian government, in mishandling, that protest, is almost creating the revolution by other means.
Yes. Because
these are 200 civil society organizations. So that means in each of these organizations, you could have 200, people, Omoyele Sowores, who are leading a coalition. On that screen there, I saw Abiola Folabi Akinode of Women Research Advocates and Documentation Center. Yemi Adamolekum of Enough is Enough. Awale Rasfanjani, that's the name of the gentleman that spoke, who also leads, the Civil Society Advocacy and Research Organization, CISLAC, and these are very serious organizations. There's also involved in this coalition the Campaign for Democracy and Development, CDD, and I say these are very serious organizations, not because of the commitment of the persons involved, but because they've been able to establish a network and they have international connections. They are coming out, further underscores how the protest by Sowore and Co. has become an issue of international concern. And they couldn't have just come out on their own. You can be sure that they will also be mobilizing other stakeholders and the networks that they are associated with. So I think that the Nigerian government should not just take their ultimatum, lightly. They should do a proper assessment, review, and see that what we have on our hands is truly, a national security crisis. And if they do not manage it well, it's the administration that will be blamed. 14 days, enough time to give an ultimatum. This should not be treated like the ultimatum that was given by the National Union of Electricity Employees, who insist that they've been ignored and that they will also shut down the country. Now, we cannot afford to have the country shut down. So government must review its strategy of engagement and ensure, that it does something. In this kind of situation, what a responsive government does is to find a way of changing the narrative. But to arrogantly assume that, well, these people can make noise, we don't give a damn, I think that would be presumptuous. That would be an act of contempt, against the concerns of the Nigerian people.
Absolutely. And Doctor, another dynamic that was brought into this story, it's also on the front page of This Day Today, is that of the Anti-Corruption Defender Award 2019 that the Wole Soyinka Institute was supposed to be presenting to Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, and he had then responded with a letter. And the letter had two parts. The first part stating that he's actually out of the country, and the second part stating that he also did not feel that he should receive the award at this time based on what is currently going on with Omoyele Sowore.
Yes, I think the Vice President should be commended.
Absolutely.
For acting after the fashion of a gentleman. The fact that he's in Abu Dhabi as keynote speaker at an important event is no excuse. He could have sent a representative.
Exactly.
In a country where many people do not have a sense of shame, I think, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo should be commended for realizing that at a time when the government that he represents is having issues in terms of human rights and in terms of his record of engagement with the people, that is not an appropriate moment to attend or send a representative to go and collect an award. However, the award that was to be given to him yesterday by the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, WCIJ, was in recognition of the record of his performance as Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Lagos State. The organizers of the award themselves said that they didn't feel that they should go ahead with the presentation of the award. But that is without prejudice to the fact that they considered his performance as Commissioner in Lagos commendable.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next story. Now, Nigerian workers in the electricity industry are set to go on a strike, which would disrupt electricity supply nationwide. Now, this is following the expiration of their 21-day ultimatum to the federal government. Now, the workers had given a 21-day ultimatum to the government and managements of other players in the electricity sector in order to address their grievances over the non-payment of salary arrears, remittance of pension deductions, and retrenchment of staff, or else they would plunge the nation into darkness. Now, their resolve to go on strike without further notification came just as the power sector consultants had said that the power generating companies, the GENCOs, and the distribution companies, the DISCOs, direly need 1.2 trillion naira bailout in order to improve services. Now, Doctor, you made a quick mention of this when we were discussing it, but let's go on a very quick commercial break. And when we are back, we will discuss this in more detail. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Rise News. We are still taking a look at the news headlines. And Doctor, before we went on a commercial break, we were discussing the topic that you had also brought up in our last headline. So let's continue with that. Well,
I think it's a very embarrassing story, and it's quite typical of how serious issues are handled in Nigeria. Now, according to Joe Ajaero, who is the president of the National Union of Electricity Employees, the union had sent an ultimatum, a 21-day ultimatum to the Ministry of Power to say that, look, if their grievances were not addressed, then electricity workers in the country would down tools and plunge the nation into darkness. You already listed the grounds, of their complaints, including non-payment of allowances, non-payment of salary arrears, poor working conditions in the various electricity companies, with the exception, they say, of the Eco-Disco, which had tried to address some of their concerns. But they got a response to say that the minister was not around and that the minister was studying the letter and that the minister will get back to them. For 21 days, the Minister of Power was unavailable, was unreachable. There was no response from his office. And I think that that is something that the president should personally take a look into, because the National Union of Electricity Employees, they've now said they could go on strike without any further notice. Now, if they do that and the country is further adversely affected, then the president should hold the Minister of Power accountable and responsible, and ask for explanations why a letter will be sent to him for 21 days and he will not act on it. Now, that level of negligence, I think, is unacceptable. Absolutely. Now, secondly, they also, tried to reach the Minister of Labour and Employment and Productivity, and the story says he had been unreachable. If the Minister of Power is not going to act, then maybe the Minister of Labour, should engage these electricity employees. Because the implication of throwing the nation into darkness is dire. Yesterday, the Senate organized, a talk shop, a workshop, titled Addressing Nigeria's Electricity Problem, Power Problem, they called it. And I think it's interesting to see that, the senators expressed concern about the power situation in Nigeria. In fact, Senator Ahmed Lawan, the Senate president, pointed out that, look, the federal government should declare a state of emergency in the power sector, because the way the country is going, we could get to a situation whereby electricity will drop below 4,000 megawatts. Below 4,000 megawatts for a country of about 200 million people. That will pose a very serious threat to the development process, to livelihood, and to the entire integrity even of whatever initiatives the government may have introduced in the power sector. In the meantime, the various generating companies and distribution companies are also complaining that they need a bailout. In fact, they sound as if they are helpless. And they are asking for a bailout to the tune of about 1.2 trillion naira. So it's not enough for the federal government to keep complaining, about whether the privatization process was in order or not. What is important is to address the challenges in the power sector and to see how Nigerians can have sustainable power supply at an affordable rate. And, that they will be able to achieve that if they engage the GENCOs and the DISCOs more proactively instead of resorting to the blaming, trading blames.
Absolutely, because it's absolutely tragic that level of negligence, 21 days and no response comes from your office. Doctor, I agree with you. If they are to plunge the nation into darkness, then he must be held accountable. Let's move on to our next headline, a very tragic story. The managing director of Maersk Line, Gildas Toho, was attacked at his residence in Ikoyi in Lagos on Sunday night. Now, reports say that some of the domestic workers for Toho planned the attack, in which the wife of the CEO was killed. Now, during the operation, him and his wife were locked in different rooms, it is as stated, where the late woman was forced to transfer some money to her attackers, after which she was forced to drink acid and suffocated with a pillow. Now, those who carried out the attack reportedly gained access to the house through an electrician who is currently in police custody. Both Toho and his wife are foreigners living in Nigeria. Police cook confessed to killing Ope Gbadamosi, the chairman of Credit Switch Technology, at his residence also in Ikoyi, Lagos. And Doctor, when I saw this story, I had chills all over my body. This happened on Lugard Avenue in Ikoyi and on Sunday night, where, rest in peace, first of all, to his wife, who was killed in this tragic murder, forced to drink acid and suffocate. And he's in critical condition at an undisclosed hospital in Victoria Island, it is stated. Doctor, what is your take on this and several other similar attacks that we see going on way too frequently?
Well, I think it's very sad. It's tragic. It's frightening. It speaks to the wave of insecurity in Nigeria and the seeming helplessness of persons living either in Lagos or in other parts of the country. Now, this is a case of homicide. What shocks me is that within 24 hours of the incident happening, we are already being given an explanation, that this is a case of robbery, armed robbery, and homicide, and that, the electrician was involved, and that these were domestic staff. If they were domestic staff, did they need an electrician to grant them access
to the house,
to the same residence where, they have been engaged as a staff? So I think that whoever is giving that explanation should not offer a premature explanation.
I agree with you.
No option should be ruled out. And the question I ask is that, could this be a case of assassination, masked as armed robbery, burglary, homicide? So the investigating authorities will have to do a far more thorough job.
Absolutely.
The persons they've arrested may probably provide leads, to what actually is involved. But oftentimes you have the police in Nigeria, they just jump into conclusion, in less than 24 hours without carrying out a thorough investigation. And those persons who attacked, Gildas Toho and his family, they are complete animals.
I'm telling you.
To force a human being
to drink acid
after asking her to transfer money, this is very gruesome murder, and this should not become one of those cases of unresolved murders in Nigeria, many of which remain in the files. And after initial newspaper comments, the whole thing is peppered over and you don't get to hear anything about it. We hope that the police will do due diligence and get to the root of this, and that whoever is responsible will be unmasked and they will be faced with, they will be made to face the wrath of the law.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Doctor, about the story that's being put out there at the moment, because that's even why I paused on reading it, because at the end of the day, if it is domestic workers, how did it take an electrician for them to get in? That's number one. And to force someone to drink acid, to go to that level whereby you know what your aim is, you just want that person to rot from their very insides. It has to be a lot more. There's a lot more to it that isn't being said, and people do need to be careful on that. But let's move over to Chile, where the Air Force says that a military plane with 38 on board has disappeared en route to Antarctica. Now, the C-130 Hercules transport aircraft took off from Punta Arena at 16:55 local time, and operators lost contact soon after 6 o'clock p.m. Now, among the missing are 17 crew members and 21 passengers who were traveling to provide logistical support. Chile's Air Force says that a search and rescue operation is underway to recover the plane, and also those are missing. Another very tragic story here, a plane en route to Antarctica from Chile, and all of a sudden it's disappeared. Doctor?
Well, I mean, again, another sad story.
Yeah.
No emergency signals were, given out. The accident happened all of a sudden. But the important thing, of course, is that a search is underway, both, on the sea, the location, the authorities suspect that the aircraft will have disappeared. But again, C-130 Hercules, that seems to be quite a notorious aircraft.
Yeah.
We have had a situation with C-130 Hercules also in Nigeria. So when I had C-130 Hercules, I remember the similar incident in Nigeria when there was a crash. And even people were suggesting that the C-130, should phased out from the Nigerian military arsenal. But I hope they get to the bottom of this and learn the appropriate lessons from it. But of course, 38 lives already lost.
Tragic.
That's tragic. And so we commiserate with the people and government of Chile.
Absolutely. And we have another tragic story this morning. We head over to New Zealand, where the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has confirmed that the tourists from Australia, the US, the UK, China and Malaysia are among those who are missing or injured following a volcanic explosion on New Zealand's White Island. Now, the volcano erupted yesterday with a towering blast of ash and scalding steam as tourists were exploring the moon-like surface. Waikato Police Superintendent Bruce Bird confirmed this morning that of the 47 people who went onto the island, 5 had been killed, 31 in hospital, and a further 8 are still missing, and 3 had been discharged from hospital overnight. He said that the 8 people missing were presumed to be dead.
And you don't hold any hope that they have survived on the island?
The pilot that went out there and spent about 45 minutes has provided a pretty good indication that we do not believe anybody else has survived that explosion. We also had the Eagle helicopter up there as well for a considerable period of time, and we could detect no signs of life.
And did you see them? Were you able to see the people who were missing from the helicopter during your reconnaissance missions? Have you seen them from the air?
Some people, not all.
To those who have lost or are missing family and friends, we share in your unfathomable grief at this moment in time and in your sorrow. Your loved ones stood alongside Kiwis who are hosting you here, and we grieve with you and we grieve with them. To our Australian family especially, we'll do everything we can to support you as you have supported us. I have been in regular communication with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison through yesterday evening, and will continue to do so over the course of the day as we're able to provide more information. For now, obviously, our duty is to return loved ones. And as Superintendent Bird has pointed out, obviously there is much more work there to be done.
47 people went on to the island yesterday. We can now confirm that 5 are deceased, 31 are currently in hospital, a further 8 are still missing, and 3 have been discharged from hospital overnight. Today our focus will be on working with the experts to determine the safety for us to return to the island to look to recover those people that are currently missing. We will be relying on advice coming from a scientific and technical committee in Wellington who are currently meeting at the moment and hope to have further advice on when we may potentially return to the island. But I will reiterate, we will only go to the island when it is safe to do so for our people.
So there we heard from Prime Minister Jacinta Ardern and Superintendent Bruce Bird with regards to this tragic event that has also occurred in New Zealand. 47 people, doctor, they said, went onto the island, and 31 in hospital, 5 dead, 8 still missing. This is just tragic.
Yeah, it's tragic, sad also, and it's a multinational tragedy involving tourists from Malaysia, Germany, China, Australia, New Zealand, and I think 2 from the United Kingdom. So the grief is, international. But I think that also we should commend, as Prime Minister Jacinta Ardern has done, the first responders, the rescue team, the helicopter pilots, who, in spite of the danger, went to White Island to rescue people, including those, who suffered their burns. The fear is that there may be another, eruption within 24 hours, maybe of a lesser magnitude from what happened. White Island is the most active volcano in New Zealand, and it's privately owned. Maybe, of course, the authorities will have to take a decision, to shut down that, tourist destination.
Absolutely.
Or adopt certain measures.